microphone's working, and welcome to the museum.
I think so. Hello? Yes, okay. Thanks, Edwards. Well, you can't start the program until Mr. Shockney has wound the clock. And I saw that he did that, so we can start the program. So Anita suggested this subject with talking about roads and names. And quite honestly, I can't get a half-hour program out of road names. So there's going to be quite a bit more than just road names, but we will come to that eventually. Well, thank you. Thanks to the Historical Society for having me. I appreciate it. There's a lot of familiar faces out there today, so it's great to see everybody that I don't often get to see, including my parents and my son. I see them. All right. Well, in college, I became such a road aficionado. I loved traveling old roads. And so that was my first exposure to Route 66. How many have traveled Route 66? Well, large portion. All right. I did it with a college buddy in Illinois and Missouri. And then our family has actually gone twice now, although they probably don't remember the first time, do you? Yeah, you're pretty young. This is taken out the windshield on Route 66 in Arizona. I think it's Arizona or New Mexico, one or two. But anyway, I'm a road trip guy. Love road trips, love old roads. And so we're going to talk about old roads.
Kurt, is that Radiator Springs?
Yes. Did you see Lightning McLeod there, driving past? All right. Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to start kind of in a much, wider span of Indiana and talk about some roads in Indiana, and then we're going to narrow down to Marshall County. And I'll explain why that is. Hi, Bonnie. I just saw that you walked in. By the way, so some of my old roads people are here. I didn't say old people. I said old roads people. So Bonnie Maxwell and Jim Gray, where did Jim end up at? He's clear in the back. We have a Historic Michigan Road board meeting after this, so they decided to come up and humor me. But quite honestly, if you want to know about old roads, especially in Indiana, Jim Gray is the guy to talk to. He has what's your blog, Jim?
blog.jimgray.net.
Full of tons of information about various Indiana roads. I don't want to leave out Joyce Chambers, who's with Lincoln Highway too. Yep, there you are, Joyce. All right, so we're taking a look from way back, right? So this is Indiana in 1823, and as you can see, there's not a lot. Certainly in northern Indiana, there's not a lot, is there? But I want to show this because I want you to think about how did people get around in the early part of the state, and how did the state encourage development in the north? So you see Madison, which was the largest city at the time in Indiana. Corydon, which was the state capital at this time, was moved to Indianapolis. And then, of course, Indianapolis, that became the state capital, I think, in 1823. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's plenty of people out there to correct me. All right, I must not be wrong. So the state of Indiana almost went bankrupt doing this. Well, I think they pretty much did go bankrupt. They did these massive infrastructure improvements in the early 1800s. And they created this system of roads and canals because how did you get around back then? Canals were just as important as roads. So the state embarked on this infrastructure program. I asked for a yardstick. So, and I know this is a little blurry, so hopefully you can kind of see it. So one of the major projects of this infrastructure improvement was the Michigan Road. Started in Madison, ended in Michigan City. There's the Michigan Road. That was one of the major projects. And they're written down here. You can see number one. Number one is the National Road. So that stretches across from Richmond to Terre Haute through the new state capital. Michigan Road's number 2. Wabash and Erie Canal. This massive infrastructure improvement that came all the way down to Evansville. Then in 1836, they added other canals, the Whitewater Canal, which is over here, number 4, and the Wabash Canal Extension, number 6, which is this piece that became part of it. The Madison and Indianapolis Railroad, the first railroad built in Indiana, that was part of the infrastructure improvement, and that is this, number 7. New Albany to Vincennes Turnpike. This is number 8, runs through here. The interesting thing about that is that for the most part, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. For the most part, it followed what they called the buffalo trace. So the buffalo had beaten down this path, to get down to the salt licks at the Ohio. So for the most part, it followed that. I actually saw an original document requesting that road be built. It was a lady that owns this property in Salem, Indiana, just outside of Salem, which that passes through. Removal of Wabash River obstruction, so basically they're clearing out the river so that you can get barges down through. And then the Erie and Michigan Canal, which is number 11, which was never built. So we would have had that piece coming into our infrastructure. So anyway, the state of Indiana was like, they're aggressive. They want the state to develop. The General Assembly is, budgeting funds to build this infrastructure program. And for the most part, it all was built. Pieces obviously were not built. The dash lines for that canal were not built. So how does that relate to Marshall County? Well, you guys all know the Michigan Road goes through Marshall County. So here it is, clear down here in the southern end of the state, or in the county, south of Vargas, and it climbs and it goes up through North Township, right? Through Plymouth. Well, this map, John Houghton, you can correct me too. Yep, there's John Houghton. John knows so much more about early Marshall County history than I do. But anyway, this map was copied from a county surveyor off of the original 1833 survey map. So the state sent out their surveyors, they created all the section lines, and then they also cataloged things that were of note within the county. So that's why when you look at these old maps, and actually if you go up to the county surveyor's office, you can see large copies of the original maps. That's why there's some oddities that are kind of included in this map. Now, first of all, the Michigan Road was actually considered a stage line kind of north of Plymouth. It was called the Michigan Road all the way through, but they called the Michigan Road through this part of Marshall County the Logansport and South Bend stage line, because obviously there were stagecoaches running. How many know where Higby Corner is? Higby Corner, all right. Well, that was where Higby Tavern was. Now, the gentleman that owns that house told me that it is the same house, it's just been reduced. It was 2 stories tall and it's been reduced. So Higby Tavern came along in the early 1840s. Old Indian improvements. This was pretty fascinating. So here's Marshall County, and this area right here had an Indian village at one time. So if you're thinking about, if you know where Higby Corner is, so the next road south of that, and if you go west, that is where, I hate to say this, that is where the county highway department has their excavation and spoil piles at. So if there's anything that was there, it's long gone. So that was right here. So there was an Indian village here. Menominee Village, well, that's this area, right? Michigan Road, this is identified as Michigan Road here. This was really interesting. They would identify exceptionally large trees. So here they're calling out this 6-foot diameter sycamore tree. Whoa, that's a big tree. And then Indian trails. They're showing all these Indian trails that kind of converge down in this area, down around Benax Village, which is Tippecanoe Wildlife Park. I should very, very well point out, Niswagi's village over here. Sorry, John, it's near and dear to John Oden's heart there. So, 1833, surveyors are out marking out what will become Marshall County. When was Marshall County established? Say it with more confidence.
1836.
Yes, thank you, 1836. So leading up to that time, Goshen had already been established and LaPorte had already been established. In fact, at LaPorte there was a land office. So you could go purchase land somewhere out in the state, but you would go to LaPorte to do that. Well, both LaPorte and Goshen wanted that connection to the Michigan Road because the Michigan Road did not go through LaPorte and Goshen, but they knew they needed to capture that traffic, travelers, settlers that were coming up that road, as well as it was also a point to get mail. So if the mail was coming up the Michigan Road, well, you could cut a day out by actually having a road that came down to what would become Plymouth. So prior to Plymouth, LaPorte and Goshen, they wanted to establish these roads. So how many have heard of Plymouth LaPorte Trail, right? Plymouth Goshen Road, that's where these come from. So LaPorte was the first to do so. In 1833, the LaPorte County Commissioners actually paid to have the road built to Plymouth. Think about that.
Whoa.
And what I've heard is it followed an Indian trail. You read different accounts of it. But anyway, they called it the Yellow River Road, and it crossed the Kankakee River where there was a ferry that was authorized. So the county commissioners authorized a ferry crossing at that point. And then there was a gentleman, Major Lemon, constructed a house. That house is still there, 1837. And he was the guy that basically, and it's right on the river, so if you guys ever take, that's Highway 104 out of Walkerton. You cross over the Kankakee River, look immediately to your right, and that house is there. And house plans and everything, it was built for this guy who then also became the guy who operated the ferry at the river. So he was authorized to do that. Trying to see if I should, repeat anything else. The Daniel's History of LaPorte County, the road and ferry did much to advance the county in population as it made Michigan City the market for all the country as far south as Logansport. So what they were doing is, we're gonna bypass the Michigan Road, we're gonna capture that traffic coming up through Plymouth, take them through LaPorte, and then on to Michigan City. Well then, Goshen wanted in on this action. So what they did, between about 1831 and 1832, they did a lot of road building, and by 1835, they decided, all right, we're gonna go down and we're gonna make that connection to Plymouth too, which is not here yet. Remember, Plymouth is not here yet. The Michigan Road is here, Plymouth is not. So they authorized this highway to come down to Plymouth. And what's interesting is, and I have a map here in a second, what's interesting here is Plymouth-LaPorte Trail came down and connected to the Michigan Road just on the north side of the Yellow River, right? Because why would they build another bridge if they don't have to? Kind of similar with Plymouth-Goshen Trail, they came down and got onto the Michigan Road just north of what we know as Shoe Ditch. So that would have been a natural creek at that time. So they're trying to not create any more infrastructure than what they obviously have to pay for. This is the old Burkholder School. If you guys used to travel Plymouth-Goshen Trail at all, you'll recognize there's a new school there now, but that was the Amish school that's there on the corner of Beach and Plymouth-Goshen. That was actually moved and turned into a house. All right, so now I'll explain. So this yellow road, that's Plymouth-LaPorte. It's 1876 map. This yellow road, Plymouth-Goshen, right? See how it comes out just north of the creek there? And then here, you can't see because of Plymouth, but it comes out just, am I still on? Okay, just north of the river. There's Michigan Road, right, in blue. There was this road that is kind of an Indian road that was kind of laid out, but it was the way for people from Culver to get to Plymouth and vice versa. And then Miami Road, and I'll bring this up a little bit later. Miami Road was here, it was a Miami Trail, and it actually links in to some of those roads, those trails, the Indian trails that were identified in Gruby's map, that early 1833 map. It actually comes down and ties into that. And right now, Miami Road goes straight down and connects to Plymouth Goshen Trail. I think what actually did, because none of these roads exist anymore, I think it actually probably skirted around Bremen and came down on the other side. So what we know as Miami Road or Miami Trail is probably not part of the original Miami Trail. All right, so how did county roads get built? Well, we built them back then. So it was the responsibility of the property owners to maintain and build county roads. So this is my third great grandfather, Dr. Chapman, and this is a receipt to the trustee saying that Dr. Chapman had done road work in front of his home. So this is down just north of Argus. So we were responsible. How many would like to be responsible for building the roads today? How many think you could do just as good a job? I didn't say that. All right, so anyway, so you have to think about this. So this is 1870s. Really, this kind of stayed in play up until just after the turn of the century. So here's 1908. By this point, Marshall County pretty much has its road grid established, right? So, there's probably very little. I was talking to Mr. Albert back there about, have you ever run into any roads that are abandoned or no longer in use? I've never overlaid this map with the current map, but I'm going to guess that probably most of these roads are all still there. There might actually be a few more, obviously, in subdivisions and such. But by 1908, our road infrastructure is pretty much in place. Now, what does that mean? What do you think the roads were? You think they were paved? Yeah, probably not. 1919 rolls around, and the Good Roads movement is really building across the country. This is something that Joyce knows well, because really Carl Fisher, the founder of Lincoln Highway, he was the one that was really pushing this idea of good roads. And why do you suppose Carl Fisher and his automobile-related manufacturing buddies felt that that was a good idea?
Money.
Right. So in 1919, the state of Indiana, in what would become the State Highway Commission, developed these maps. And they said, all right, well, let's look at where are our primary routes now. They're not identified as numbers yet, right? So this is Michigan Road, which is actually referred to as Dixie Highway. You've heard that term, right?
Yep.
Dixie Highway stretched all the way to Florida. Another one of Carl Fisher's ideas. Then there's Yellowstone Trail. How many have heard of that? All right. Which kind of followed parts of what became the Lincoln Highway here in Marshall County, but not really. So Lincoln Highway kind of runs along the Yellowstone Trail, but then it actually cuts out and goes across here. So this is it coming in and then coming down and going straight straight east. And then there's the Yellowstone Winona, well, it's kind of both. So Winona Road obviously went to the village of Winona. That was part of that trail system as well. So you can kind of see there's, a few other, those are railroads, the heavier lines. Goodness sakes, I have not been talking that much today. But the heavier black lines are railroads, and then you see a few of these other roads that kind of work their way through here, such as the road coming down from Goshen. Those roads are still present, but the state hasn't really identified those yet. Jim, you might have to take over for me. So 1920, the State Highway Commission is established, and now they're starting to identify these collector roads, the roads that are going through communities, and they're creating a numbering system for them. Now, none of these roads, or none of these numbers probably look familiar to you today, right? So Michigan Road was Highway 1. But not all of Michigan Road. So Highway 1, Michigan Road down to Rochester was Highway 1. Then Michigan Road took off and went this way, kind of southwest. But the highway itself continued south of Rochester. Let's see, Highway 44. Highway 44 is what we kind of became Highway 30, but really in this evolution, it's essentially kind of following the Yellowstone Trail still. It's not actually the Highway 30 that we came to know as, or Lincoln Highway. Highway 50, which is now Highway 10, or at least in some configuration of it, it's Highway 10, but it only runs to Argus westward. So let's see here, so in this, the road that runs Plymouth LaPorte Trail is not here, Plymouth Goshen Trail is not shown, 331 is not shown. What's missing? Where are those other connector roads? Well, those would come quite a bit later. But this is the first kind of capturing of roads within the state highway system. So in 1927, this road network is being developed. And Bremen is feeling left out. Okay? And I'll show you why in a minute. Has anything really changed? Are there any Bremen people here before I really put my foot in my mouth? Has anything really changed? All right, first of all, now this is in the Bremen Inquirer, so you know there's a bit of an angle going here. First of all, Plymouth gets a new bridge at the county's expense. By golly. And actually, these are kind of funny to read because this estimate, you have to read this and think about this. So you have to think about Highway 31 running on Michigan Road, right? Highway 30, which is going to become, or Lincoln Highway, which is going to become Highway 30. So the Plymouth Pilot quotes the president of the Chamber of Commerce saying that there's 16,000 cars that would pass over the bridge every day. So this is the bridge that's going to be built on Lincoln Highway. So the Jefferson Street Bridge over the Yellow River. This is the bridge that they're talking about. One Bremen citizen reading this and making some quick calculations wondered how on earth the traffic north and south on State Road 31 on Michigan Road would be able to get through that stream of cars running complete, day and night, right? 16,000 cars a day, without essentially building an overhead for Highway 30 to cross the Michigan Road. So, Bremen's being a little funny. But the interesting thing is, Bremen's trying to figure out how do we stay connected on the Plymouth Goshen Road, because that was their main. Highway 6 did not exist. Highway 331 did not exist. So Bremen's feeling left out because there's no state highway that is being planned for Bremen. So here's some more of that building anxiety that Bremen has. New State Road may hit Bremen. Logansport people now, they're renewing their effort to get the highway from Logansport to Culver and then on to Goshen, following Plymouth Goshen Trail. So Highway 17 had been proposed between Logansport and Goshen, following the current route, but then following Plymouth Goshen, that last leg, north of Plymouth, it was being promoted, obviously, by Bremen as early as 1929, but it never occurred. And why the portion of 119 was designated by 1940 is a mystery to me, too. Marshall County was left out. So, as you guys know, once you get north of Napanee, Plymouth Goshen Trail is Highway 119. But it was never built. For whatever reason, it never connected to Plymouth. And the plan was that would all be Highway 17. Plymouth LaPorte Trail, that lack of designation in Marshall County is also strange, because during the 1930s, that old trail was considered an improved county road in all three counties. However, Marshall County segment was of lower quality construction, go figure. And that remained true until 1940. Though in all counties it had improved. By 1945, both State Roads 4, so Highway 4, this is kind of an odd thing. Plymouth LaPorte Trail is both Highway 4 and 104. So it's Highway 104 from Walkerton up to what cuts over to Fish Lake, Highway 4, and then it's Highway 4 on up to LaPorte. But for whatever reason, they never made that connection down to Plymouth, so they never crossed into Marshall County to create that. I would love to know, how much, whether it was county commissioners said, no, we don't want that road, or whether it was the state that's, my guess there was something that was more political involved there, because it would have, certainly in the Bremen to Plymouth situation, that should have been a state highway. All right, so this is 1932. Now, more of these roads are starting to be developed. So what do we have here? So here's Highway 30, which now is the Lincoln Highway, so it's what we know of. It's not following Yellowstone Trail now, it's now Lincoln Highway. And it's developed between Warsaw, through Bourbon, Inwood, Plymouth, on out. So it's established now. Same with 31, Old Michigan Road. So all the way from South Bend, down south. Actually, there's a really interesting story around the south end of Lakeville. If you look at older maps. 31, how you take that broad sweep, then you see the lake on your left hand, or excuse me, your right hand side on the east side. That was not there. It followed straight north at the old 84 Lumber. Am I dating myself now? All right, at the old 84 Lumber, it followed straight north, and then it cut directly east, and then it went into town. But probably by the 50s, they had improved that curve improved to make the curve and take that jog out. Here's Highway 6 being planned. Highway 6 had made it over to Napanee and almost to Bremen. The dash line, or whatever, dash line, the road bed is there, it's being improved. The dotted line, it's not there yet. But I want you to look at something. Where that dotted line is not US 6 today. So there's a road that follows the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad that goes directly east out of Walkerton. And that went to the north side of La Paz and actually continued on. And that was kind of the road between La Paz and Bremen, as well as back to Walkerton. It kind of followed that more straight route. Because Highway 6 comes down on the south end of La Paz, before La Paz expanded to incorporate it. So even what they've got shown here, because see it's going through Tea Garden, Highway 6 does not go through. Anybody know where Tea Garden is? All right, Highway 6 does not go through Tea Garden. And here, if you look at Highway 10, it's being planned east of Argus, but it's not there yet. Highway 331, it's being planned, but it's not there yet. Again, I think I mentioned Highway 17, which here, they've got roads, this is straight out of Donaldson, that's not 17, but here they turned and went east just north of Burr Road. So even in this, the Highway 17 is not what we think of as Highway 17 today. Now, I'll throw this in because I like old buildings and architecture. That's the Garner Inn that was at the corner of 6 and 31, the old 6 and 31. Here's the Mayflower. I love this photo. I wish the Mayflower still looked like this, but obviously on Lincoln Highway. And then this is the Dixiana Cafe that was on the southwest corner of 6 and 31, a little further south. Anybody go to Max Market when it still looked like that? You remember Max Market long enough ago? It looked like that, and actually that building was, when Ronnie McCartney built the new building, he moved that around the corner.
How long ago was that, Kurt?
When he built the new building?
Yeah, when that would have still been there.
What year was that, Dad?
When US 31 was 4 lanes from South Bend to La Paz.
Okay.
was the early fifties.
Well, but Ronnie built his building much later than that.
About 95.
Okay, that sounds
All
about
of
right.
that, day.
Okay.
Well, it was when he sold the other property to Burger King, or, yeah, Burger King. All right. I'll take a little caveat here, but this is important to note. So, through some research that Karen Redinger had done, and then through some work that I was actually doing with Bonnie Maxwell down in Carroll County, started looking into this mystery of these trees that were planted alongside the road in the right-of-way. And there was this big program in the 1930s, kind of part of the Works Administration program, or federal relief program, that they were doing these landscape projects along the state's highways. But they had very specific standards. So your right-of-way had to be so large, so wide. And then they had a prescribed variety of trees. They had to be native and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, Karen had heard this story. Sometime you walked in because I was talking about you. So Karen heard this story. I don't remember, because you guys have property or something.
I figured it out,
You figured it out.
because there are honey locust trees every so often down Old 30, and I thought, what a weird tree to have every so often.
In the right of way, no less.
And, right, in the right of way, and Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address under, I think, honey locust tree, and I'm like, what is the connection here? So that may be
Yeah.
what occurred.
Yeah, so, and it's interesting because on Michigan Road, when they did this program, they planted sycamore trees. But at any rate, so this was first done, oh gosh, do I have, yes, between 1935 and 1936. Actually, the section between Plymouth, which I think actually was probably more like La Paz, the section through Marshall County down to Rochester was the very first one done in the state. So, hey. But, yeah, so here it's talking about the beautification. Here's a couple of honey locust trees on Highway 30, Lincoln Highway. And so we've got newspaper articles from the 31 portion, as well as the Lincoln Highway portion. And I did write an article about this. I don't know, I haven't written articles in forever, but I did write an article about this that went into a little more detail. But this is actually kind of a fascinating little story, because what was going on, and Joyce knows this, along with the Better Roads movement, they were also, particularly by the work of Jens Jensen, who was a famous landscape architect, they were prescribing how to beautify roads. And, you know, that's kind of an odd thing to think about going on in the 1920s and 30s. But they were doing that, and so there was like actual landscaping plans for these areas. And I hope we don't lose all these trees. We've lost a couple when they put the roundabout in just north of town. There were some sycamore trees up there. There's still one in front of the old Evan Janes that's still there. But if you start to see a pattern, it's like Karen said, you'll start to see this pattern of trees, and it's pretty obvious because they're in the right of way, and you know, why would you plant trees in the right of way? But yeah. Sorry, that was a little detour. So 1936, we'll go back to county roads now. 1936, this is our established road grid. And here, if you look at the legend, they've got paved roads. Not many paved roads are there. And then there's surfaced roads, which really was just gravel roads. It might have been some kind of gravel oil mix, kind of like what we do with chip and seal. But essentially, there's not even a lot of that. So there's still a lot of just plain old dirt roads that are identified by those just two white line, or the white line. This is important because I'll tell you why later. It's just to keep you in suspense. There's no reason why. All right, 1950. So now we're pretty much set. Now all of our roads are there, right? So we got 331, Highway 10, 31, 17. They're all pretty much set as to what we know of as our highways today. Well, minus the bypasses, right? The new 31 and the new 31 and 30. All right, here you go. So this is the one slide. No, there's two slides on this. When did we get our road system in place? When did we get that naming system and the road numbering system in place? Well, from what I can tell, it happened about 1954. They had been wanting to do it prior to that, but the county was too cheap to do that because it was going to cost, where's the number? $6,000 to get those signs up. And so they just passed it on, obviously. $6,000 is a lot more to then than it is today. But here you go. And it describes them as 3-inch tall black letters in a white field with a black border. How many remember these signs? I remember them. Do you remember them?
Yep.
It's not been that long. Well, maybe it has. It's been right 30 or 40 years ago that they were replaced. But they lasted a long time. They were porcelain enamel signs. And then we know, because in the Bremen article, it talks about the town of Bremen then adopted the same sign type and system. Now, let's see, what's the next one? This is not an actual picture of the sign, I just found one that looked like it. So the county surveyor recommended the naming system followed St. Joe counties. So we just extended their north-south roads south in the naming system. They've got trees and shrubs, we've got trees and shrubs. Now, east-west, we went to a numbering system where first road, second road, third road are a mile apart, right? And within that, if it's like 1A, 1B, then that's within that mile
Kurt,
separation.
Kurt, is there any guidelines to how far those roads are apart?
Even the AB, well, they have to follow section lines, or most likely they follow section lines. It used to give Larry Fisher a fit because the Michigan road sections don't line up with the rest of the county sections because the Michigan road sections were identified first or sold off first.
Okay.
So when you go out in the county, I know I've talked about this before, so if you go out in the county and you get to a point, if you go off a Michigan road and you have to make an S turn, you know, sharp turns, that's because it's realigning with your section markers or your sections. You learned something?
Yep.
All right, goodbye. All right. So now there were a few names that survived. Obviously, Goshen Road and Plymouth LaPorte Trail survived. The one that I think is funny, and it's the only one that like doesn't fit into anything else. Now, King and Queen Road were supposed to be major north-south collector roads, so that's why you have those. They're not trees, King and Queen Road. And Mark Gidley likes to point out that the roads aren't necessarily in alphabetical order. That's true. There's like a Hickory Hawthorne kind of mix-up somewhere. Somebody didn't know how to spell. That's my guess. But the one I love is Muckshaw. And Daniel McDonald gives an account of how that came to be, which evidently must be an old term. I'm looking at some old people.
Wow.
Evidently, like if you got your wagon stuck in the mud or in the muck, you would say pshaw, which I don't know. I might hear Grandpa Simpson say every once in a while. But that's Muckshaw. So, and there's probably worse words that were used by farmers who got their wagon stuck in the mud. So, yeah, so that's kind of it. And obviously Miami Road comes into Marshall County from St. Joe County, and it follows that Miami Trail. Miss anything on that? Any questions on that? I don't know if I went over that too quick. All right, here we are, 1956. Well, there's still a lot of gravel roads, and we haven't gained that much more in terms of paved roads. So, now I'm not going to get political, but it might sound political. This is my warning right now. So 1950, those are the average weights of vehicles. Now I put a 0 on a garbage truck because people didn't have garbage trucks coming and picking up their garbage out in the country, all right? So you can see, garbage truck today, 10 tons. An average tractor in 1950, 2.5 tons. Average tractor today, 7 tons. Average grain trailer, 1950, 11 tons. Average grain trailer, 42 tons.
Whoa.
Where do you think I'm going with this? Anybody have any guesses? Where do you think I'm going with it? All right, first of all, that's my grandpa that's on the tractor here. Now, My dad told me this story. If I get it wrong, Dad, don't say anything because it's funnier the way I'm gonna tell it. So my grandpa would do some road work with the county. Was the county, was it not, or was it the state?
I think it was the state.
It was the state.
I don't know if that picture has anything to do with it, but,
I can't quite make out what's on the truck. But anyway, didn't you say that they were using shovels to load gravel into the bed of that dump truck? And Grandpa was like, why are we doing this? So he went and got the tractor. Is that the old Farmall?
no, that's a John Deere.
They had a Farmall for, it was a 1950 something Farmall. Huh?
They had John Deere, I think probably somewhere between 1950 and 55.
Okay. Well, where I'm going with this is, we really haven't changed the way we built roads. Do I need to say, do I need to say anything here? That is a paved road, and that was from 2015 that our county truck is stuck in. That's an old Model T. I have no idea what year that is. But anyway, do you get where I'm going with this? Unless we change the way that we actually build roads, which a number of the counties that surround us have. So most of them started in like the 1970s to actually come back and rebuild their roads. Because of that. You can't put a 42-ton truck on a county road that's built like it was built in the 1950s. So, yeah, it's often said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So, I don't mean to be political, but sometimes you have to look back to history to kind of know where you're going and decisions that you should make.
So Kurt, you're saying that the picture on the left, that's a paved road?
This is a paved road.
Oh, going up.
Yes. As part of my illustrious time as county commissioner, which I just would as soon forget more than anything. Do you guys remember, it was the first time I think it ever happened. Do you remember we had this really strange freeze-thaw cycle, and it was in February, March of 2015.
Yeah.
Where we actually closed the roads. We put out a road advisory because the roads were just giving loose underneath. I had a pickup truck, and I could feel the roads collapsing under my truck. Now, I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get too political, but part of the problem was what we think of as a paved road is not a paved road. A chip and seal road is not a paved road, is it, Mike?
No.
Fellow commissioner back there. That's just loose gravel in a binder put over a gravel road. I mean, and the road base hasn't changed from 1950. And so, but you're running these tractors and these, dump trucks on these roads. So we have to start thinking a little differently. And, my contention here is we probably need to start rebuilding our roads like the counties around us. If you go into Elkhart County, you can tell, right? Or St. Joe County, most of their roads, Kosciuszko County, most of their roads. You can tell that they've gone in, probably, my guess is 1970s, 1980s, and they actually rebuilt their roads from the ground up. Yeah, so that's what happens. Now, the picture on the right, you're right. That was after the flood. So that was aggravating even more situations because it was washing out all that gravel underneath. Now that's a ditch. That's up on First Road, I think it is. That's a ditch. And Mike, you were out there looking at this road damage too, just like me. What did we end up with? It was like $5 to $10 million worth of damage.
It was what?
It was insane.
Yeah.
But a better road would have held up, and we saw a lot of our roads. We lost a lot of our roads during that time. But we build our county bridges to the standard that carries the weights that I was talking about. but we still haven't changed how we build roads. Maybe I did end on a political note, but anyway, so there you go. I think this is a picture of the Lincoln Highway being built. Joyce, do you recognize this photo? I think it's a Lincoln Highway being built west of South Bend, right? Yeah. We're gonna bring it back to that.
Kurt, I got a quick question. You never talked about 117. How did that end up? Was it just some rich lake people?
They probably didn't like the way the county was taking care of the road. That's a good point. I don't, let's go back. Let's see if it's in that 19. There. Oh, how far back do I have to go? Well, it's not 1950. So it's not there in 1950. My guess is that was probably like a late edition in the 60s or maybe even. Does anybody, I mean, that's not that long ago. Does anybody remember when Highway 117 was designated? I'll find that out.
You're talking about on the west?
East side of the lake, yeah.
I just always thought that was a weird anomaly, a road, state road that goes nowhere.
It might have had to do with the academies maybe. Because if you think about it, well, no, even then, because you would have come in on 10. I know a lot of people run across 110 to go to 117 to
Yeah.
go visit their lake cottage.
It connects two state highways. I mean,
It does.
technically, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
But then you just go another 2 miles and you get on Highway 17, it connects too. So,
Oh, yeah, somebody needed a quicker route to get their car to whatever. All right, is there any questions? Oh, Jack, what do you have a question?
So one of the north-south roads that, I'm pretty sure this isn't a tree name that you didn't talk about, is Union Road.
Oh,
How did Union Road come about?
Who invited him?
shouldn't he be at work
Yeah.
and tell his bosses?
This is a county building.
Oh, that's true. He's making sure that, there's no
Yeah.
emergency happening here, Well, that's, I don't know, maybe it has to do with Union Township, but that's further south, that's not West Township. Or that is West Township, that's not. There's no, I don't know. What's a Upas?
Yeah.
It's a tree.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Who said that? All right, thanks. Thanks, John.
I think I seen on a 1923 Indiana map, and I'd never heard of this one, Plymouth Huntington Trail. It's marked on there.
That'd be too far south for Lincoln Highway, right? No.
It traveled, basically what it did was travel the Lincoln Highway, and you know where the gun shop used to be. It went across the railroad track there and got onto, what is that road that goes to Huntington? Now there's a state highway that goes to Huntington there.
205.
Well, where did Yellowstone Trail went to Fort? Did Yellowstone Trail go to Fort Wayne? Maybe it stayed. I wonder if it wasn't some evolution of the Yellowstone Trail, and maybe they just, like the Winona Road, did they just name it? Because, most of the time, those road names were because they connected to another town, like Goshen Trail.
Why would anyone go to Huntington?
They have a really cool courthouse. Has anybody been inside the Huntington courthouse? It has a glass block floor. It's pretty amazing. Yes, John?
Just for the sake of irony, we've talked about it here before, but our county surveyor, Howard C. Grube, actually invented the A system, not identical, but A system of coordinated road numbers. So ironically, all the counties around us have a system based on our county surveyor's idea, but we didn't like it.
That came up on the radio show last week.
Did it really?
Well, I hate the south 300
Yeah.
north, whatever, west, and the intersection. I hate that. I know if it's a tree, I know about where in the county it might be, right? And then based on the address, you can kind of figure it out, or if it's a numbered street. Yeah, I'm sure they're used to it down in Fulton County, I can't stand it.
Gaston County has that too.
Yeah, they do.
Stark
I
County
worked
has
over
it.
there, those people, that's great, they knew exactly where that was at.
It's too many numbers for me.
Hey, that, Highway ten east of Argus, your grandpa helped build that, cause I heard him mention it several times and said some words about the jog in the road just east of town. Considering the builders or whoever it was
Well-
that designed it.
That, I don't, no, that probably shouldn't be a Michigan Road jog, a Michigan Road section, because you're talking about way, like a couple miles east,
No,
right?
that's only about a mile out where the cemetery.
Well, then, okay, oh, yeah, it is, there's a sweet,
Jog.
so that is probably a Michigan Road section jog.
So I always figured the Michigan Road part was the in town, right there just to the east of McDonald's. I always figured that's what that jog was for, the Michigan Road lands.
Oh,
But
well, that may
that'd
be,
the west side.
because if you
Yeah.
think about it,
The
the
west side.
sections,
Yeah,
the
that'd
Michigan
be
Road's
west
not in the
side.
middle of the section always. Sometimes it's, you know, to one side or the other.
Well, you know, part of Marshall County is actually in Fulton County even too. If you look down there at the very bottom because of that
Oh, because
Michigan
of the
Road
jog.
lands, because that Michigan Road lands, yeah. South of it's south of 110. Yeah.
Anybody- Yes, Mike?
Just a comment, I remember my grandfather Apple telling me that he helped build US 30 in Bourbon Township. So he was farming, but then they would take their equipment like that and haul dirt for the old 30 that went through Bourbon to Mike.
Well, the story about Grandpa getting the tractor instead of doing it by shovel always reminds me of, a statement. Is R.T. Hinkie here? Did R.T. make it? He's usually here. We were out working at Jacoby Church one time, and he, you know, and I've got an older White Hogan board. As I'm looking around it, my members. I didn't include you in that, Mark. But anyway,
Hickory Road is still in dispute. There's a property owner that owns a lot of Hickory Road, south of 15th Road. And the road is not on the section line. Whatever happened, if you go down there to that intersection, that is not lined up. And the county did not put the road on the section line like it was supposed to. And to this day, that property owner to this day still disputes that the county's road is not on the section line where it belongs.
well, he doesn't pay taxes on it, does he?
I don't know.
If I were him, I would set up a toll booth on either end of my section. What I was gonna say about RT is, RT made the famous statement, we were working out at Jacoby Church, and he said, Kurt, it's time to work smarter and not harder. So I think about that with the shovel in the back end. Anybody ever use that?
Yeah.
There are other questions? Yep.
Kurt, you and I had a conversation one time about Plymouth Goshen Trail, and maybe you can talk about why it's the way it is. So, you know, it just jogs
Oh,
around.
because it's kind of disconnected.
Well, the land, wasn't something to do with the land and the topography of the land and the wetlands, it wasn't something to do with that too? They
Well-
tried to go around.
Right, so, I don't know how far back that one was, but if you think about Plymouth Goshen Trail today, it's kind of hard to stay on it, or Plymouth LaPorte, quite honestly, because you're constantly running into another road and you're taking a sharp turn, and it wouldn't have been like that, right? So it probably would have been very serpentine and ran, you know, and missed, you know, it stayed to the north of the Yellow River, because they don't want to do a river crossing. But it would have been very serpentine. They weren't following section lines. In fact, a lot of times if you go out and look, there's property owners who own like a corner on the other side of Plymouth Goshen Trail. I would imagine it seems true with Plymouth Port. But yeah, it was there before they were laying out, you know, the roads in that kind of methodology. So today, when they came back and built the county system or the county grid, well, there were pieces of that road that probably are gone, but probably are still across some farmer's field or something.
Well, I was always under the impression that Plymouth Goshen and Plymouth Port followed Indian trails and or animal trails
Yeah.
and high ground, you know, the,
Yeah, I know I've heard that about Plymouth Laporte. I don't know that I heard that about Plymouth Goshen, but I heard high ground, or read it.
high ground to avoid where water pooled.
Which
Can I
makes
throw a little
sense. So you don't have to say pshaw.
A researcher was in one day working on the Plymouth Goshen area and said to me, did we really think the Indians knew where they were gonna put the county seats? Which made me rethink that whole, how long had that particular trail been there?
Yeah, I don't, now, I suppose, well, they would have connected villages. And, yeah, I don't know of any evidence of a village in Plymouth now.
The company's, reservation came up into Plymouth, so maybe that's, if they're saying Indian Trail.
Well, if the idea was that there was a good crossing at the river, and we're talking, you know, before the Elkhart County Commissioners built the road, if they were going to Menominee Village, well, that would have been kind of out in that area. Now, that would have been before Menominee had their reservation. Well, no. When was the reservation established, John?
Yeah, I knew you were gonna ask me that. It was the Treaty of Chipaway, signed down on, at the south edge of the bridge, the dangerous old bridge on Old 31.
Yeah.
So the marker there, you could go and find out the date by looking at it, because I don't remember. But forget-
There's your homework assignment, right?
Early 30s, it wasn't, none of those reservations were there very long, but we know that Menominee would visit Van Ack, and we know that that Indian trail went past the, there's that dairy farm on 13, a little bit west of the Humane Society. So that's where James Houghton's house was, and we know that Van Ack's, Menominee would stop there for a cup of coffee on his way to visit Van Ack. At least one of the routes went down, in that south.
Look at that.
West of town.
John's telling me something, and I you know, because I have to go proving right or wrong.
Right.
Here's the trail. So here's the next village right here,
Yeah.
and Grube does identify a trail, John. It starts right about here. Now it might have gone further, but it does wind its way all the way down to this point. So that's just about to Michigan Road. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And the Mizwagi village is right there, the reservation. All right, other questions? How are we doing? It's a little after 1. Any other questions real quick? I'll take one more. Yes?
When you were talking about, Indiana spending a whole bunch of money in the 1800s to build the roads, were they mimicking other states that had done that or were doing that? That they, you know, spent that kind of money and took themselves to near bankruptcy? Or were they doing something new?
John's got his hand up. I'm gonna guess that they probably were to some part, because we were connecting to other roads. Like the National Road ran all the way from Washington to Vandalia, Illinois, right?
Close.
The first state capital?
Mhm.
John, did you wanna?
Yeah, in particular, Ohio, had already put in canals, which one of the troubles with the Wabash and Erie Canal is that Fort Wayne isn't on the lake, right? So they had to have a canal through Ohio to connect Fort Wayne to the Great Lakes. And Ohio didn't want to build it because they already had a set of canals of their own. So yeah, they were copying their elders and betters in Ohio.
If you ever want to see, and Bonnie's here, so she represents Delphi and Carroll County. If you want to see something a really great interpretive kind of piece, go to the Canal Park in Delphi, or the systems of locks that are still existing for the Metamora Canal, or the Whitewater Canal in Metamora, is unbelievable. And they used to be very non-accessible, with the exception of just a couple right around Metamora. There's a group that's gone in and built a trail system, so you can actually bike for, I don't know, it's like a 5 or 10 mile bike and see about a dozen lots. It's really actually quite impressive, and those are from the 1840s.
Didn't the railroads really, weren't they the demise of the canal system?
Yes.
Yeah, and actually some canals, like Whitewater, sold their corridor to the railroad. So what was the first thing you think the railroad did? No, well, they may have in other canals, but the Whitewater Canal, there were so many mills that were using hydroelectric power. Am I saying that right? Yes. Yeah, so they were using water power.
There wasn't any electric, yeah.
That the deal when they bought it, when the railroad bought it, was that, well, you have to continue this flow for the canal. But what the railroad did then, they built their depot across the top of the canal in Metamora. And if you look, they also put a series of bridges, because they didn't want anybody trying to, go back to the old canal.
Mhm.
They didn't want the competition. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much. It's great to see you.